this is an opportunity that I jumped out to come and celebrate this legacy of the Point 4 program, because the Point 4 program is really the one that gave me the very foundation upon which I had a good career. By any measure, mine has been a good career. But that is the basis of that. And the basis of that is because I took my intrinsic motivation from the values I learned from these people and also from the legacy of this university and the high school I attended. As a 14-year-old, I got the opportunity to go study at Jimma Agricultural and Technical School, favorably called JATS. That was where my foundation started. Imagine a kid from rural Ethiopia. And I dramatized my story by saying, the day before, I was sleeping in my mother's hut, on the floor, on a mat on the floor. The next day, I was at Jimma, sleeping on a bed, a clean white sheet and a blanket. That is a transformative experience. What is even more dramatic is once I got there, the values we learned, the educational process. Imagine this is a vocational technical high school, not a formal academic school, but the values we got and the education we got, we're extremely proud of, and as it turned out, it was the best education anyone can get. So that, I feel very, very strongly, very favorably acknowledge the contribution of Jimma Agricultural High School. And then we went to Alama, the story was the same. And so for several years, every year in Jimma, 50 students from rural communities would come to attend. They would be split into two groups, 9A, 9B, 10A, 10B, 11A, 11B, 12A, 12B. 200 people. That was how big the high school was, a small high school. When we got to Alama, it was not that much more, 400 students. So these are people that you would know by name, every one of them, the character, what moves them. So you learn from each other. That's the tradition that built us, that made us who we became. And so I came here representing no one other than myself. I'm not standing here on behalf of the United States government. I'm not standing here on behalf of Purdue University. I came here individually, on my own, very proud and very happy to have this opportunity to go through and share my story, the story of the Point 4 program, the impact it has had in the economy and the development of this great country. Thank you. As the ambassador indicated, the story of the Point 4 program starts with President Truman, who was coming from, at the time, at the end of the Second World War, and a lot of that was in his mind. And so, in his inaugural address in 1949, I would warmly invite you, please, just for the record, please Google it up and read the story, the inaugural address of President Truman, the statements that were made, and tells you very clearly what he was coming from and what he wanted to impart in offering this. War was in his mind, and so he said he's going to have this program of peace and freedom, 4 major courses of action. The first action he said was, again, coming from the war, he knew the value of the United Nations. And he said, we will continue to give unfaltering support for the United Nations and related agencies. Point number 2, we will continue our program of world economy and recovery, and that is, he was thinking about the Europeans and the European Marshall Plan that about a year earlier that he committed himself to make. The third was, we will strengthen freedom-loving nations against the dangers of aggression and security of the North Atlantic area, and that's what has become today. And then on the number 4, he wanted to be very specific. We must embark on this bold new program for making the benefits or scientific advances and industrial program available for improvement of growth and of less developed areas of the world. What he meant by that, and he would describe in the inaugural address, you will see that he said, America is beginning to be a major economic nation, and we've advanced our science, we're making progress industrially, we would like to share that with poor developing countries, because when they do grow, when they do grow their economies, when they get themselves better, they're going to be partnered with us, not on the fight for freedom as well as for economy. And so this, as I said the other day, was an enlightened self-interest. And so American foreign policy that I've gotten to appreciate over time, governments come and go, but the philosophy and the basic rationale behind the way they operate in the individual countries is based on that aligned self-interest. We will help you, we'll assist you, but we also want to be partner with you. And I would like to say that the partnership with Ethiopia that endured for decades is based on that philosophy that we would like to acknowledge at this time. I wanted to, again, maybe chronologically indicate that the inaugural address was made in 1949. In January, a year earlier, in June 1949, Truman asked legislation to appropriate 6 months later a $45 million allotment. That was what was paying for these institutions that would get the .4 program. Selected countries got this opportunity. Selected countries, highly selected countries. And so of those, I've had first-hand experience with a couple of them. One is the life I lived with Harama and Jimma, and then Brazil, University of Viçosa, that was established by the .4 program. And Purdue University was the university that helped University of Viçosa. I happened to study the history of those institutions, and I would like to tell you, when I was invited to go and speak at University of Viçosa, I asked if they would dig up in their history and tell me how much money was spent. It was about $11 million over the 15 years. And I came back to Purdue and asked our international programs, could you look at it, how much was spent? So it's exactly $11 million. And I asked an economist at that time to translate what that would mean in 2009 when I received the World Food Prize at that time. And it was about $60 million. And I would imagine it would not be more than 80 or 100 million. That's a small amount of money, but the legacy and the impact of that program was heavy. And then in 1950, .4 passes the art of international development. As the ambassador said, from 1949 to 1961, the program that ran the technical assistance program for the United States was the .4 program, until President Kennedy in 1961 created the U.S. Agency for International Development. Again, let me pause and say that it is a story of the .4 program that I'm going to share here, but I wanted to divert a little bit, and at this time speak about the land-grant university model in the United States. The motivation that President Truman had was built on his experience of what land-grant university had done for the state of Missouri and for several states in the United States. That is, in 1862, President Lincoln legislated the Morrill Act. The Morrill Act that gave every state that was interested to apply a land possession of 33,000 acres from the western part of the country so that they could sell timber from that and commit to establishing a land-grant university model, the land-grant university colleges of agriculture and the mechanical arts. And the reason was at the time, even though there were universities in the eastern part of the country where the colonial settlers were, agrarian society, most of America was agrarian. The Industrial Revolution was creating a new middle class. but agriculture has had some concerns. Soils in the east were worn out because of the population increase. Migration of people was to the new states in the west. There were plenty of crop failures in 1838, created food scarce. That continued to be even in the 1913 during the Depression. And then famine in parts of Europe in 1840. All of these were alarming, and therefore they thought maybe committing the nation into land-grant universities that would serve the communities was what was in his mind when he created that. I just also wanted to share with you what 19th century political and social background in the United States at the time was. There was emergence of science in Europe and unhappiness with higher education institutions because these were elitist liberal arts universities that were in the East. And so the philosophy there and the curriculum was not one that would benefit rural agrarian communities. There was unrest in agricultural circles. Councils and institutions were formed across the country to enhance the economic development in rural communities. And then the desire for education was growing. As I indicated, agricultural productivity was lagging behind Europe, so this was an alarming time. Engineers were needed to build roads, bridges, and operate factories. And so they thought maybe if a more appropriate education could be created for America, and that was this creating colleges of agriculture and the mechanical arts. Mechanical arts at that time, in those lingo at the time, was engineering schools that would build equipment and tools. By mid-century, the groundwork had been laid out for the land-grant university system. Public demands for a new system was very strong. Agricultural interest in a new institutional systems were growing. Land grants as a mechanism for funding public needs had been used successfully, needed for visionaries to make it happen. And so 1862 was when President Lincoln, as I indicated, created the land grant university model. I tell this story because it's interesting. Things never happen as fast as they do today and always take time. And so a young congressman from Vermont, Justin Morrill, proposed the land grant idea to find the resources to build these colleges and universities. By 1859, he continued to fight. He got it passed by both House and Senate, but the President Buchanan at that time vetoed it and it failed. So until 1862, when President Lincoln took over, and somehow Morrill persisted, and therefore eventually was also named after Mr. Morton at that time had become a senator, so he had a little more clout, and that's what was named after him. So the People's University was a reality in 1862, but they have had a long way to go. So what happened was, and then they started asking, what's the land-grant university? Who does it represent? By then, historically, black institutions were not created, and therefore black colleges and universities were not legislated at the time. So in 1890, there was another act, the Morrill Act of 1890, and so those schools today are called the 1890 schools. And then Tribal Colleges Act was not legislated until 1994, more recently, completing that promise and commitment to the country. And yet, there were a lot of problems, just like people like Dr. Samuel would understand, funding shortages, state, and then the state roles and private roles needed to be defined. And so they needed to think about what would the state role would be. Well, again, as I would indicate maybe in the next couple of sentences, one thing that I'd like to share with you what I learned was how democratic a process was the land-grant university model, because once it passed the legislation, It involves the federal government, it involves the states. There was funding available, made available by federal grant. The state also made funds available. So the states also committed themselves to building institutions to their county, each one of the counties. So the counties are funded, state federal government, the state government knew, federal governments were also involved. Then there were also, the same time, the same situation in Ethiopia, and I think maybe the older generation would know this even better, that at that time, the interest to come and study in colleges of agriculture was not as hard as it was later on, and so even in the United States. So a shortage of qualified students, internal bickering over the mission, whether the mission is serving the people or not, lack of perceived value to farmers. And so making sure that this can be bought in, that the community would buy into the concept, it took a lot of doing to process that. So that began to bring new legislation. In 1887, the Hatch Fund to establish experiment stations throughout the country was established. So every state had federal funds to establish experiment stations, to also fund the research through this federal funding. Created agricultural experiment stations could now address concerns of farmers, created very strong political advocates. That's what I mean about the democratic process. Trigger friction of the two levels. Initially, again, the reality that today's Ethiopian universities face within colleges of agriculture, teaching versus research. How do you allocate time within universities, whether it is you want a broad education or a narrow education. I remember when I was a senior at Alamaya, I was president of the Plant Science Club. I remember holding a seminar, inviting faculty to hold a seminar with us, whether or not we were being trained the way we should. Are we getting enough hands-on experience to serve the communities and so on? And then to continue the story, experiment stations are created. There are teaching with the Moral Act, education that was federally funded. And then it wasn't until 1914 the created operation of extension services. So extension agents were not created until later in 1914. So now, in every state, jointly funded by state and local government, targeted technology transfer to farmers, families, and youth. And cooperative extension represented the third leg of the land-grant university mission, joining teaching and research. So all of a sudden now, there is a tripartite function of an American land-grant colleges. There is teaching, there is research, there is extension service. And in every one of those, and particularly the extensions, and what it did is, every state, every county was funded. Every set of programs what the community needed were served through that. And one of those is extension service, including home economics, educating food quality and nutrition to families and so on. So that service, to me, that the thing that really stands high, not only the efficiency of what a tripartite institution does, but how it engages the communities to assert themselves and tell through their states, through the county government, exactly what they needed to be served with, and therefore the universities responded to reply and respond and hold themselves accountable. With that background on the land-grant university, I'll switch back to what I'm here to talk about. These are in my judgment, these are the iconic Ethiopian institutions that were created by the Point 4 program. One is the Jimma Agriculture and Technical School that is now today's Jimma University, and Alamaya College of Agriculture and Mechanical Arts. And then the relationship between Jimma and Haram Mahan, that is I was the last graduate of the high school in 1968. And And then every year throughout the history of that high school, we'll sit for an exam given by Haramain University. Based on that evaluation, we will be picked between a combination of our 4 year of high school grades, and then how we did on that entrance exam will qualify to attend Haramain University. The rest of our students that didn't qualify, they would go to government service in the Ministry of Agriculture and then fill in posts as technical extension agent services. At the time, based on this history of the legacy of the land-grant university model, Oklahoma State folks knew that there is a need for establishing an experiment station, and so they established an experiment station at Debre Zayed. So these are the 3 College of Agriculture and Mechanical Arts related institutions. And then I would like to acknowledge 2 other iconic institutions that were funded through the Point 4 program. Gondar University, the public health program that we have known for a long time, and that to become Gondar University today. And in the private sector, I really want to really hold out the Ethiopian Airlines as the most iconic private institution, a parastatal, but that was allowed to grow and develop and left alone to perform. I can't think of any other private institution that had that kind of background, stayed the course through several governments, and still is a national flag that we hold with pride. And so that is truly an iconic institution. Even though the relationship, the program was signed before 1949, the technical assistant program that they received to establish the mechanical technician schools and so on, all were funded by the Point 4 program. And the contribution of these institutions is any program that has started in this country since then had its expertise come from these schools for decades. So the reason why I hold these institutions up, the reason why I say it gave me my motivation and my foundation is this value that you learn and to serve your community. And again, the legacy of those before us and what was inundated to us year in and year out, why you go to school is to serve the country. And then whenever you're assigned, that discipline, that service orientation exists in the minds of many of us, whether we were good at it or bad, but the education was there. I will say the same for many of these institutions. And quality answer, I can come back and accentuate this point later on, but what really built up on that is the formula that Oklahoma State University had, well, at least particularly in working with Haramain University, every year, the best of the best in the students in the class would be invited to be serving as junior faculty. Not very many, a handful of them would be selected and retained there, and then they will be there for a year or two, and invariably would get an opportunity to go and study abroad to receive their masters, and then they would come. After they do their master, they would come back and serve for at least 2 years before they could turn and go and get a PhD. What an incredibly wise mechanism that was created to strengthen the institutions and build the university capacity. So by the time we went in, my department was one of the first ones to have their faculty 100%. Dr. Brahani here, who became a department head, under him, for the first time in decades, he came back from his PhD a couple of years later, but we have 100% faculty in their department. And I think your department may have been 100%, ag economics wasn't it? Yeah, ag economics also was Dr. Solomon, who was the head of the department. So it was a wise vision and wisdom and mindset that existed. In addition, I'd like to identify these two institutions that really had commitment to the country, and they have done that for a number of countries as well, that provided for opportunities for graduate education. The Rockefeller Foundation in the general agricultural sciences in various ways. Some of the best people that had come back and received their education there. The Ford Foundation, specifically in the social sciences area, they supported a lot of people for graduate education. These were the institutions that helped sustain and build institutions over time. And so the cumulative effect of that early generation .4 program continued to grow. With that, I'll just list some of this and speak very briefly about this second generation derivative institutions that have been created. And the point I'd like to make specifically is each of these institutions and the legacy they had, the impact they had, but all again were manned by alumni graduates, by and large. They were manned by alumni graduates. 1966, the Institute of Agricultural Research was created. I was in high school at the time, but I remember the individuals that led that. Warku Makasha was the first general manager. I know this because once I went back to Purdue, he received both his undergraduate degree and graduate education from Purdue University. So he was the Director General at the time. Bakala Warku from Addis University, he was administrator at the time, and he hired me when I finished high school to work with them. And so I also knew the FAO program leader that was a co-sponsor with that in establishing FAO, a Palestinian named Nasser Fadda, who was incredibly talented individual that really committed his service to the country and really strengthening that position. And once, immediately after Dr. Ato Bakala Warku Makasha, a fellow Purdue graduate, Danyacho Yerbu, became the DG of EIR. And so the leadership there, I had graduated high school from there, and I remember that experience. And then the National Extension Service that was created at the Ministry of Agriculture. Many of you remember EPID, Extension Project Implementation Department. All of them were manned by alumni graduates and Jimma and Nambo graduates from high school. That's the multiplicative effect of early investment in capacity building. Again, there were two iconic institutions I recall. Many of you had first-hand experience with them. The Chilalo Agricultural Development Unit. Dan Yergu was the director over there at the time. And these are a comprehensive agricultural service program. All of a sudden, the mindset was, we need to put together all the elements of agricultural science and extension and service to put together a faith. That was a successful program that introduced input use, improved seeds, improved fertilizers, and then connecting farmers to market. A totally integrated package program that was funded by the Swedish development program, and then Walamo Agricultural Development Unit, basically similar factor, and that was the government committed by going back and getting loans from the World Bank established. These were again building on that early investment, really giving the country what science and technology can do for a country, and then demonstrating that and packaging it and sharing with the country. One of the problems that arose because of the success of the Chilalo Development Unit, I recall, was land tenure became an issue because absentee landlords that held the land began to kick the tenants because they were too successful. And so they came back on farm, and so brought about the issue that the student movement take to account and say land to the tiller. And that was a political movement started out of this successful program at Chilalo. And other rural development programs We have a number of student graduates from Alabama. A team of 3 or 4 would get land concession from within the Awash. Awash is a river that is a very loyal river in the country that would start in the highlands not too far from where I grew up and would end in the Indian Ocean. It goes through the country, and that river provides an exceptional opportunity for mechanized farming. And so teams of Alabama graduates put together farms, successful farms, and many of them would go out and buy and take a loan from the bank. In a few years, they all paid up their loans and became successful farmers until the government changed, and the communist government that came in took over all of that belonging, discouraged, and since then, we have not seen a successful farms, in my mind, that were just private. These were, again, the legacy of the Point 4 program, examples that were set. And if the country was under peace and stability, tremendous opportunities that may have arisen out of that. Another one that I want to raise is Sasakawa Global 2000, an extremely impactful program that took up and scaled up. And people talk about scaling up today. That was classic scaling up of working with farmers, and started with a small number of acreage, 300,000 acres in the country, of extension service par excellence, going and teaching the farmer, working by side, and then making improvements in the life of people in the community. But that was really a true successful program that eventually convinced the government to take it up. And the government at the time took it up and expanded it even more. And that was when we really truly saw scaled up technology transfer in the country as a result of this program, Sasakawa Global, funded by Sasakawa, a Japanese philanthropist, who wisely teamed up with President Carter, a political leader, and then he picked Norman Borlaug, a renowned scientist, made up a team of people to work with him in bringing about this technology transfer opportunity, and they led this program in Mali, Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and then I remember Uganda. Of all those places, the most dramatic experience was the one in Ethiopia that really was very successful, and that's because of that early education and capacity building at Haramain University that started. One point that I should have mentioned I missed is, at the time when we were students, Haramain University was held up not only as a college and university for Ethiopia. There were students coming from neighboring countries, from Kenya, Tanzania, Cameroon, Malawi, all English-speaking countries. They were coming here for getting their degrees, and these were classmates of ours who went back and became leaders in their own countries. And so that was a legacy program, just again, a multiplicative effect. In fact, they were looking at it, at least we were looking at it at the time, was that this was going to be the equivalent to American University of Beirut, and that was really the mode in which that was held at the time. And the last point that I want to make, a couple of points here that I need to mention is, I say brain circulation style at African nations, international organizations. The point I'm making here is, over time, we began to lose people, and that's when you don't have peace and stability, the things that arise. So people would go, and so instead of staying here and serving the nation, all of a sudden we're shaping and exporting our best of the best to go and serve international institutions. Many of them served for decades and eventually came back to settle in the country. These are the people that I asked to stand in the first group. Those were the experiences there. And then when Jimma Agricultural and Technical School became a university, by and large, in the beginning, where the faculty were still being built up by alumni and graduates. And the same for Haramaya as well. Because of that background, throughout my career, particularly after I began to be looked at as a thought leader, these are the things that I experientially took up as the most critical for any nation. Building human and institutional capacity building. I guess I don't have an attribute here. The first one is a quote. Enhancing the technical, organizational, managerial, and policy-making capacity of personnel so that the nation's ability to evaluate, analyze, prioritize, and address critical issues that impede implementation of development options. It was an op-ed that recently put out from three people that I had the privilege of rubbing shoulders with. Senator Lugar, who is from the semi-state of Indiana, a person I've known for a long time. Peter McPherson, and then Dan Glickman, who was the Secretary of Agriculture. They put together an op-ed, and I took this quote from them. A strong agricultural station building, strengthening vital agricultural institutions such as educational research, extension, input delivery, value addition, processing and marketing, supply chains, regulatory and policy-making institutions. That's what completes what college education agricultural institutions can do. The last point I want to say is this. I told you that I had experience with the University of Viçosa. I went to graduate school with a number of Brazilians that went back and became leaders. At the time when I was in graduate school, in my department of agronomy, 25% of the graduate students in the department was Brazilian. The reason was that what Brazil did, and we didn't do in Ethiopia, is Brazil went out and got a loan from the World Bank. And they decided to enhance their institution, the Viçosa University, and also expand it to other states. They took a loan and sent out, with just one that project, to train 10,000 new graduates to go get education in North America. And Purdue University, that created Viçosa, was the one that was coordinating the educational program of this Brazilian. So that was a tremendous investment to go back. What created Embrapa was to be the best international organization in any country in terms of agricultural research, was created as a result of that investment. And so I say, what if? What if we had peace and stability? If we had those kinds of opportunities engaged, we could have even done a lot more than we had. And so this is how it's done in building institutions, strengthening institutions. Even though I say what if, but I'm also encouraged by recent developments that have taken place, particularly in this century. The good news is that the nations in Africa and here have built up multiple university campuses in a short period of time. The students came in large numbers, and of course, the unfortunate part of that is universities struggle to fill faculty positions. Quality declined significantly, failed to impart basic knowledge to offer technical skills, diminished opportunities for scholarship to Western universities. But again, through time, some of this maybe have been corrected, but that's a struggle that the leadership of universities is at this time. Just the number of students that are coming up to study are overwhelming, but the growth of faculty and the capacity of that being strengthened requires a lot more investment. So what I'm saying is, this is a great time to maybe to partner with African universities and government, with other African universities and governments, but in an area to do these exceptional kinds of investment, to be tailor-made, to grow the strength of existing institutions, and maybe have these institutions to consider and to look into their programs and say, how can we be more creative to make sure that we're really tailor-making our education to serve communities? And that's the point, the last point I made here is to be very smart, to create smart, broad, and parallel HICD in high institutional, human and institutional capacity development is needed for Ethiopia and other African countries. As I indicated, I believe in human capacity building and strengthening of institutions. The one drawback that is very hard to avoid is it's a slow and deliberate process to build an institution and build capacity. To have partners that would work with you to build that up in strong institutions is very difficult. And so that's why initiatives like Embrapa and what the Brazilians have done is a way to accelerate those development. Otherwise, every time I have a conversation with people, they say, but what you're saying is good, but it takes time to build it. I said, tell me anything that is better that pay dividends if that is quicker than that. There really isn't. There really isn't. If you sustain that over time, you really don't have any other opportunity. But I draw on the Brazil and China and India experience because these are institutions that have invested in these are governments that have invested in their institutions, but the model for each is different. I told you what Brazil did. They invested on their own. China was very clever. They sent students in droves to Europe and North America and have them get educated because they prepared them in their STEM education, and so they can be competitive to become university research assistants. They would come in, they were bright, they were well prepared, they would compete, and after they built up their skills, they went back to their countries and strengthened their institution. India, on the other hand, sustained from the beginning. Nehru declared from the beginning that we're going to spend our resources to build institutions, and they got it done that way. And the public-private partnership in a growing agricultural sector is very important, something that we haven't done here. We haven't done in linking with the private sector and building a strong private sector to collaborate and cooperate with the government. And I keep this a point I repeatedly make, programs, not projects, for catalyzing agricultural development. You can bring in as many NGOs as you like. Those are project-based, 3-year activities. It's a show and tell. There are good intentions, but demonstrate and do that. But outsiders don't build nations. Nationals build nations. But nationals can't do it without the government deliberate investment and perspective developed. Cannot continue to dispense development assistance the way you dispense disaster assistance. So, and that's why I think of all the investment that I had seen throughout my decades of experience, I can think of a well-meant investment that helped poor nations like the Point 4 program that was deliberate in its intentions and provided the kind of educational investment that it had made that is long-lasting. We need to harness Africa's demographic and youth dividend. Despite growing challenges of conflicts, famine, and epidemics, the future of growth, peace, and stability in economics and demography, I believe, is positive in Ethiopia. Care is needed to make Africa's youth bulge its gold mine, not its demise. Meaning that the African dividend, the youth and population dividend, is only good if we are deliberate and intentional about investing in them to make them a force in science and technology, and not if we just leave them alone and can't even have a decent job to support their own families. But if we do, I think the payoff and the dividend can be extraordinarily excellent. We need to develop the energy and talent of young Africans to opportunities, give them the chance to emerge as future leaders, and need global partnerships with sustained investments. At this point, I'm going to take a few minutes. I think I've had great opportunity in my career, and one of the reasons why I want to come to a group like this is really to see if I can impart some of my experience and what opportunities exist for well-trained individuals to the young people. And I've had a great opportunity to work over the years with the Rockefeller Foundation. So in 2007, 2006, I think, I took my first sabbatical leave in 4 years of service in the university. I worked with the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation to create the Alliance for Green Revolution for Africa after spending a year in Nairobi. To me, the sabbatical leave was a game-changing experience. And you all know from the write-ups and so on that I have done reasonably well in my science. But this was the time when I began to be looked at as a thought leader and had tremendous opportunities to engage with other programs. In 2000, I finished my sabbatical in 2007, and one of the things that happened was in 2009, before I received the World Food Prize, I was invited to, we were going through the food and financial crisis at the time, and I was asked to provide a testimonial about food security to the U.S. Senate and Foreign Relations Committee. And that was a tremendous opportunity to speak on behalf of the continent and appeal to the Foreign Relations Committee on food security. And then shortly after that, I spoke at a seminar at Center for Strategic and International Studies in June of 2009. Joined the CGIAR Science Council about the same time, and that gave me another opportunity. I joined the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. That was the beginning of an activity to create Feed the Future. I received my World Food Prize in 2009. Senator Clinton announced my food prize at the time. She really took the elements of my speech at CSIS and really laid out what was needed in nation building using science and technology, for which I was forever grateful because she articulated it clearly in a way that would get voice. A year later, President Obama had announced his creation of science envoys. And the first cohorts of science envoys were Bruce Albert, who was president of the National Academy of Sciences, and then Elias Derkuni, who was director of the National Institute for Health, and then Ahmed Wali, who was a chemist from Caltech, who was a Nobel Prize laureate. On the second season, a year later, the three of us here, Rita Colwell, who was the director of National Science Foundation, Alice Gass, who was president of Lay University, and I were named to serve as Science Council, as a science envoys. About the same time, the main name I mentioned earlier, Rajiv Shah, who was at the Gates Foundation when I spent a year on sabbatical, had known me for some time, and so he asked if I could serve as his senior advisor when he became USAID administrator. That gave me an opportunity to engage with the U.S. government at that level. During the same time, I was invited to work with the White House panel, with the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Joined the CGIAR Consortium Board when they were trying to put together a board that would govern all of the CGIAR centers. served there for a 3-year term. I served on the board for International Food and Agricultural Development, BIFAD. I first held, you were allowed to hold 2 terms in BIFAD. I served from 11 to 16, renewed my service there. But then President Trump did not appoint any, and I was asked to stay on the board and serve for another 3-4 years until President Biden came. Ended up being the longest serving BIFAD board member by default. I served on the U.S. National Academy of Science Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources for 2 terms. National Academy of Sciences Global Science Policy. And then now appointed at the first United Nations Advisory Board, where the Ban Ki-moon set up. Another great opportunity to work with incredible individuals. One of the most cherishable experience working with some of these boards is, in addition to what you learn and what you may contribute, but the kind of people you meet on these boards and the relationship that you create, how long-term that is terribly, incredibly impactful for me in my career. Another opportunity I had was I founded the Purdue Center for Global Food Security and served as its executive director for the last 10 years. With that, I'm going to share this picture. This picture is a picture that was taken when the World Food Prize sent me to Ethiopia to get footing before they announced my World Food Prize. And one of the places I attended was my elementary school. And these kids gathered around me and the photographer took that picture. That's the only picture that hangs in my office in Lily Hall in my agronomy department. It meant a lot to me. What it is I was one of those kids. I was one of those kids. Except we didn't have shoes at that time. But as shattered as these shoes are, this may be a sign of progress, but anyway, the simplest thing is that was who I was years later, playing in the grounds that they play in. And so I'm gratified by the recognitions I received. One of the bigger ones was after I came back in the country, invited by colleagues and the president of the country, President Girma, celebrated me with the first National Medal of Honor for Science. It meant a great deal to me. I just recently then received the National Medal of Science from President Biden. If I may, let me say this. Americans talk about exceptionalism a lot. Of all of that, the one single exceptionalism about America can be expressed in a quote that I read credited to Senator Kennedy. And I'll try to recall that quote. And he says, "Our roads are not paved with gold, but they are paved with the promise that anyone who lives here, even strangers that are coming from outside, would go as far as their work and character could take them." And I say, that's a singular American exceptionalism that holds true forever. And that's a country now a black woman is aspiring to be president of. So regardless of, I can't think of any other place in the world that provides opportunities for others, for their own people and for others. For that, I'm forever grateful. On behalf of my colleagues here, and behalf of this nation, I'd like to pass on, Ambassador, this message of thank you and gratitude to the government of the United States. I've received a lot of accolades and so on, but I'd like to, just on behalf of my family though, My greatest achievement is this. These are my pride and joy. Let me not be emotional. It starts with a woman, this beautiful woman. Can you stand up, please?